Good afternoon, everyone. This is SCORE Cleveland. And if you're here for a webinar on the law and business, you're in luck because that's what we're going to do. This is a brief introduction to SCORE, and I'm just going to take you through it and then turn it over to Phil. SCORE's mission is to foster vibrant small business communities. Without regard, fear, or favor, we help everyone who comes to us to thrive as a small business owner. As you know, small business drives the national economy through job creation and wealth building. All SCORE mentors and presenters are volunteers and give freely of their time, knowledge, and energy to others. SCORE is the largest network of free volunteers. There are approximately over 10,000 people nationwide in over 200 chapters who work for SCORE. Cleveland is one of the largest chapters in Ohio. We serve 7 counties across Northeast Ohio, from Sandusky on the west to Erie on the east. And you can easily request a mentor, and we're going to show you how to do that just at the end of this brief slideshow. We empower all entrepreneurs to succeed, and we look forward to hearing from anyone who wants to have a mentor. This is our website, and it's score.org. And you can request a mentor by putting in your zip code, and you'll be directed to your local SCORE chapter. Our services are free. We do receive a relatively small amount of money from the Small Business Administration of the U.S. government. It's a grant, but the majority of resources that provide SCORE with its operations come from our partners. And these are our partners, including Truax Law, who's our presenter today, Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, Grow Capital, PNC, KeyBank, Community Foundation, Lorraine County, Comstar, and Wells Fargo. And we thank all of our supporters for their contributions to SCORE. And this is a QR code. And if you have a mobile phone handy, if you're not watching this on your phone, of course, you can click on this and get the link. And if you want to just write down the link, it's www.score.org to find a mentor. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Phil, take it away.
All right. Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everybody. It is afternoon now. So my name's Phil Truax. I'm an attorney of about 20 years practicing law in Northeast Ohio. We have a small law firm, Truax Law Group, located in Avon, Ohio. And we have 5 lawyers at my firm, including myself, as well as an accomplished staff. And our firm, what we do is representing small businesses in Northeast Ohio, and in North Central Ohio, Sandusky, Norwalk, Port Clinton, those areas as well. I've been asked to present today on kind of just general small business issues, to give people a kind of a thumbnail idea of what some general business law things to think about when you're starting a business or about to start a business, or you have started a business and you're rolling and have some questions. These slides will be available for everyone to have a copy of after the end of the presentation. Also, you'll have to forgive me. We have an asphalt project going on at our property, so you might hear some heavy equipment, and we're right on the street, so apologize in advance for that. A little bit about me. I went to Ohio University to get my undergraduate degree in broadcast journalism. Started primarily in sports, actually, radio and TV. And then I decided to break away from the TV world and went to law school at Case Western Reserve University. Spent a couple years in Cincinnati, but the vast majority of my career in Cleveland and in Avon, Ohio on the west side, but again, representing folks and businesses all across Northern and Northeast Ohio. So I will go ahead and share the slides here, and we'll get this presentation rolling. And I know that we'll be monitoring the chat as well for questions as they pop up. So Here we go, navigating small business law. What we're going to do is kind of go through an overview of a number of different things. We're going to talk about business entity selection. And so what does that mean to LLC, corporation, partnerships, that kind of thing. Business partners, do you want a business partner? What is involved when you have a partner in your business? Franchising, independent mostly. That's what most people do. They start a business on their own and they go ahead and build their business by themselves. But franchising, participating in a franchise is certainly something people look at. Site selection, despite the work from home trend that we've seen after COVID, many businesses still have some type of a location of their own. Some of them is just an office out of their house. And of course, some of them have an individual office location, what have you. We'll talk a little bit about contracts and what it's like, the different types of contracts that you might have, and what does that mean? How does that affect you? And then we will also talk a little bit about intellectual property. I am not an intellectual property lawyer. There's a whole lot of intellectual property issues that are out there, but this is intended to just give you a taste of some of the things. And in fact, that's kind of the general theme about all this today is, you know, if we dove into all the areas of business law, we'd be here for hours and hours and hours and hours, and nobody wants that. This is just to give you a flavor of some of the things to start to think about, because candidly, if you are a business owner, if you're getting ready to start a business, you need a lawyer. You need to make sure you find a lawyer for your company, for yourself, for you and your partners, to make sure that you're going down the right path. So this is really just an idea of kind of open your eyes to some things and get your mind cooking on some things that you need to understand as a business owner. And you know, we are certainly, as a law firm, happy to have conversations, but if nothing else, you need to make sure that you have competent counsel in business law going forward to help you take care of your business. So let's start with business entity selection. Sole proprietor, what that means is you're the sole owner and you don't have a business entity. You may have chosen a business name, ABC Supply Company, but you don't have an LLC, a corporation, or whatever it is. It's just that name of that company. Sometimes you hear DBA, doing business as, but it would just be, you know, Jim Taylor doing business as ABC Supply Company. That's the easiest and cheapest way to do things. The problem with that is that there's no separation between the business entity and Jim Taylor's personal life, his assets. You work out of your house and you don't have a separate entity, then that means your house and your personal assets can be subject to any liabilities, any risks, any debts. So it is a good idea to consider other alternatives to sole proprietorships, but there are instances where there's very low risk, very low financial risk to you and the company, and you may not want to go forward with setting up another entity. Those entities, there's partnerships, there are limited partnerships, which means that there's a general partner and then kind of silent partners is the way to think about it. So multiple partners where a few or one person may just be helping to fund the operation, but they have very little, if any, role in the company and no decision-making authority, but there's one general partner who does make all the decisions. There's a limited liability company. That's probably the most common business entity that's out there, an LLC. LLCs are flexible. They're easy. They can be like corporations or they can be like partnerships. And you can pretty much draft operating agreements to say whatever you want as far as how you're going to operate that company. And then there's corporations. Corporations are kind of the traditional mode of entity for businesses in Ohio and elsewhere. Corporations, the only problem with corporations is they come with more administrative requirements, more corporate formalities, maintaining minutes, business minutes, resolutions of things that are happening. There's the statutes require certain things in corporations that aren't required by LLCs or the Partnership Act. There may be best practices about how you run and document your business, but corporations tend to be a little bit more involved, but there's reasons for that sometimes. So all of these depend on thoughtful consideration of what is best for you, for you and your partners, for the business. I included a note there about the Corporate Transparency Act, which is an act that is a recent development in the law that the federal government wants business owners to make a filing, beneficial ownership information, BOI, you may see that on postings on the internet, or CTA, Corporate Transparency Act. And basically, it's a very simple filing requirement to file with the federal government, to tell the federal government that I am a owner and exercise substantial control over this LLC or this corporation, or I own at least 25%. So when you own at least 25% or you're a substantial owner, you have to register with the federal government. And there's just a concern that the federal government has of people kind of doing things improper, tucking away things that they're not supposed to under the names of LLCs or corporations. Frankly, I think it's an unnecessary hiccup to solve a very few minor issues that have happened over the years with small businesses and LLCs. You have enough on your plate to have to worry about jumping onto the internet and filing with the federal government, but that's what they say. That's what's required. There's been a lawsuit in Alabama to overturn that Corporate Transparency Act on the grounds that the federal government doesn't have the authority to tell us that we have to tell the federal government that we own an LLC or we own a corporation or a partnership. That was a successful lawsuit, but it's only applicable in Alabama. So for the foreseeable future, we here in Ohio and surrounding states have to comply with that Corporate Transparency Act. There's an awful lot of information that's online to provide guidance, but if you need further guidance, either your attorney or we can help to make sure that you do what's needed. But thankfully, it is a pretty straightforward legal requirement that's out there. Let's jump along now to business partners. So most small businesses are sole owners. It's just James Taylor. And why did I pick Jim Taylor? I have no idea. That's the first name that came to my mind. I want to at least use one individual's name just as a kind of an example, but it's just Jim, nobody else, no partners. Jim runs his business, my law firm. I am the sole owner of my law firm. I started my law firm in March of 21. I do not have any partners in my law firm. And maybe that's a good way to kind of maybe use me as an example. Why don't I have any partners? Well, I don't have any partners because I'm super picky. I'm very picky about who I'm going to be partners with. And I have been in law firms with partners before. And it is a very tough thing to find someone who aligns strategically, philosophically, from a business strategy standpoint, work ethic. There's all these things that that I have thought about, and why it's very hard for me to find a partner. Not to mention, I'm probably not maybe I'm not the best partner to have anyway, but at least from my perspective, I know that I have a number of boxes that I want to check in order to have a partner. And until I find that partner, I'm going to continue to own my business by myself. Some people go into it with a partner. Some people decide that they've worked with someone or they have a family member or whatever it is, and they decide that they want to go in and start a business to each other. The word partnership there on the slide is more of a vague general term partnership, not like the legal entity partnership. So that partnership there just means I have another owner, could be two shareholders for a corporation, could be two members, which are owners of an LLC. But you just got to make sure that it's a good fit, and you got to make sure that there's very clear, candid discussions between the partners on how the company is going to be operated. And then that needs to be in writing, everybody. Make sure that if you have a partner, do not, for the love of God, have partners and not put everything in writing, because it is a recipe for disaster. No matter how wonderful that partner is, how long you've known each other, how many schools you went to together, how many cookouts you go to, how many family members you share, how many Super Bowls you've watched over the years together. It doesn't matter, because business is hard and things happen in business. And the most expensive form of litigation that's out there is business divorces. And what makes them more expensive is when you don't have an operating agreement, when you don't have corporate bylaws, when you don't have a partnership agreement, when you don't have that core document that lays out who owns what percentages, how those percentages can be changed, if ever, whose responsibilities are what, who gets to make certain decisions, how those decisions are made, are there voting, all of those things. What happens when one of the partners dies or becomes disabled? What happens if there's a divorce? If one of the business owners, they're both married and one of them divorces, what happens? So these are all things to think about when you decide you're going to go together and form a partnership and run a business with someone. And you have to make sure it's in writing. You can technically have an oral partnership and not have a written partnership agreement, but it's a mistake. So make sure that you go through with that extra effort, write it down together, bullet it out, and then if either have an attorney draft those documents, which is the best practice, but if nothing else, each of you write it down, put it in a document and get it signed. That if there's anything you're going to take away from this and this presentation, it's if I ever have partners or if I do own a business with somebody else, get it in writing. And then of course there's financial considerations too. There's how are you going to start the business? Or do you have the funding to get started? Who's got the funding? Maybe one person's got more financial wherewithal than the other. Maybe nobody's got money and you got to go to a bank. And how are you going to get the loan from the bank? You've got to be able to show that there's financial backing from either the partners or the business or both, so that a bank will actually lend money. And of course, SBA has many opportunities for loans. There's lots of different types of banks. There's big banks, there's community banks, there's alternative lenders. You got to be careful with some of that stuff, but there's lots of different ways to go get funding to get the business rolling. So there's many financial considerations when you're getting started with a business. Is the business an independent business? Is it that ABC supply company where you're just supplying construction materials or office supplies, or you're providing just a service, or are you participating in a franchise? Are you opening whatever business, Panda Express or whatever outfit that's out there that you want to start a company? I don't know why I thought of Panda Express, because there's one in Avon that opened a while ago, and that's the first one that came to my mind. But the point is, there's benefits and drawbacks to having an independent business versus a franchise. Starting a franchise is nice because the branding is already set up. You're starting up in a business that is recognizable from people who are driving by or people who are online. They already know the business. There's a trust that's built, and there's a grip with customers who see that logo, who see that sign, who see those colors, who see the trade dress, and they immediately associate your business with the larger franchisor. And then, of course, the drawbacks are there's usually a franchise fee, a pretty sizable franchise fee. You can't just call Starbucks and say, I want to open up a Starbucks in Olmsted Falls, because I think that we can make a lot of money in Olmsted Falls with a Starbucks. There's an initial investment that's associated with that. There's obviously some limited control. You can't do whatever you want. If you're going to start a Starbucks, you've got to do things the way that Seattle wants you to. You have to pay that initial fee, but then there's a franchise agreement, which is usually a very large agreement. There's usually booklets or pamphlets that kind of walk you through what is expected out of a franchise owner. And then, of course, there's reporting requirements. You have to tell Seattle what we're doing, how much money you're making, what your gross profit is, what your net profit is, what your expenses are, and they, of course, are going to consult with you, which is great because you have Seattle who can help you and make sure that you run your business efficiently, but it comes with a cost and it comes with added administrative requirements. If you are independent, you don't have to worry about most of those things. On the other hand, you can't put you can't put the Starbucks logo on your front window and start selling coffee and sell Starbucks coffee with that brand recognition, with that specific type of product. So it's a little bit more challenging in that regard to have an independent business, but I think that's what most people do. Most people take a shot on themselves, take a shot on their product, take a shot on their service, and they run with that independent business model. So those are all important considerations. Site selection. Many business owners work from home. Many business owners have their company running out of their basement or their garage or their loft or their attic or just their kitchen table. And sometimes the nature of the business is easy to run outside of your home, out of your home, I should say. Otherwise, you might be looking to have a business, whether it's a storefront, whether it's a small office in an office complex, could be one room, it could be an office that actually has 3 offices and a conference room. You've got to kind of make that determination of what you need if you're going to have something off-site and how that's going to work. So then you've got the concept of, okay, so I'm deciding I'm going to open I'm going to have my own separate location. I'm going to have a lease, or I'm going to have I'm going to buy it. I made a determination when I started my law firm in 2021 that I was going to lease a separate place. I felt that the law firm would have better credibility if people could come in from time to time and meet with my law firm in a physical office. And I also made the determination under my own strategic plan that I created, which I would also recommend everybody else create a strategic plan, a simple plan of where you see your business in the next few years so that you can set goals. And I made a determination that in 2 to 3 years from starting the firm, I was going to purchase a piece of property and move the law firm to that piece of property. And we actually were in a position in just over 18 months from inception where things were going well, and we ended up purchasing a historic home, which had been converted into office. It's actually a pre-Civil War farm cottage that's a stone home in Avon that holds about 11 offices and a conference room. So we got to that point, but that was a result of planning and then goal setting and getting there. And your business may have no desire whatsoever to buy a piece of property or to buy a building or to buy an office condo, which that's a really good option, by the way, buying office condos instead of buying property. Or you may just say, you know what, we just need a lease and I just want one office, or maybe an office and then a separate office that we can serve as a meeting room. You've got to think through all those things and what you want to do. And each one of those have legal implications. One of those legal implications is zoning. You can't, you can work out of your home. You can take phone calls and work on your computer and generate documents and print things and mail things or fax things or email scan documents out of your basement. No problem. But the moment that you start actually having people come into your office to meet, the moment that you actually are conducting a business that's involving third parties, that's where you've got to be careful of whether or not you're complying with your own zoning code. And then, of course, you're deciding when are you allowed to conduct business. You may be doing work for a larger employer right now, and you're starting your business on the side. Very common thing for people to do. Well, you've got to make sure that if you're going to be doing business after hours on your own small business, that you're complying with the appropriate zoning regulations that are applicable in your office or in your hometown, that is. And then if you're going to go ahead and procure an outside place, whether it's by lease or or purchase, then you've got to make sure you understand what the local regulations are. We'll go to the next slide, and that gets us into lease issues. But some of these things are things to think about if you own also. One of the things I have there is signage. If you find a location and you're going to put a sign up, sometimes the landlord has something baked into their lease. Well, they will put a sign or multiple signs up. That's great. And they've done the research and they know what complies with the law, the local law, and not. If there isn't a place for a sign and you want to put a sign up and your landlord says, yeah, that's no problem, go ahead and put a sign up in the tree lawn or along the road or along the sidewalk or whatever the location is, there are more than likely local regulations for signs. So think about that. But here, what we've got on this slide is lease issues, things to think about if you're going to lease from a landlord. There's, how long of a term? Is it a renewal term? What is the rent? What is a percentage of rent or a separate payment for what we call CAM, common area maintenance? Things like snow removal and mowing lawns and landscaping and cleaning hallways and all of those things. That's all common area maintenance that multiple tenants typically pay a portion to the landlord so that the landlord can then appropriately spend money and take care of common area maintenance. What's the landlord responsible for? What's the tenant responsible for? Sometimes landlords want a personal guarantee from you and not your LLC or your corporation to cover rent that's owed. I'd recommend that you stay away from personal guarantees as much as you possibly can. Sometimes it's unavoidable. For example, the first loan that you're going to get through your business, it's probably going to be impossible to do that without a personal guarantee unless the business has more than sufficient assets to provide security for the loan that you're going to get for your business. But just don't go and sign documents that makes you personally liable for anything and everything to the landlord or to, a customer. There are some customers that have vendor agreements and supply agreements that want people to sign personal guarantees. Just be very mindful of whether or not, you don't need to do that typically, and you want to stay away from it, of course. And then we've got restrictions and covenants there. Restrictions and covenants, you can't do certain things. You're not allowed to do certain things under lease documents. Sometimes there are restrictive covenants and things when you are in an office condominium, same type of thing. You may decide I want to buy an office condo, which could be a really good investment. But you're going to be under very similar restrictions that you have here on your slide. So those are things to think about. Contracts. Almost every business is going to need a contract. Almost every business is going to require some type of an agreement, and you should be using written agreements for as many things as you can. And when you get written agreements from vendors, let's say, or some type of a service provider, we had this asphalt company. I told you that we're having asphalt put in our back lot today. They provided a contract with us, and it's basically a purchase order of sorts, a proposal that has terms and conditions. Don't just sign it and give it back to them. If nothing else, do the best you can. Set 20 minutes, 30 minutes aside so you can read it, so you can understand at least what you're signing up for. And you're not just signing up to buy asphalt. I can tell you that right now. You're signing up to bind yourself to a certain level of risks and obligations and restrictions and things like that, payment terms and all of those things. So make sure you're reading that, but you also should be issuing a contract of some kind. If you're a photographer, you should be having some type of an agreement that you're asking people to sign. If you're starting a cleaning business, there should be a proposal form that you're using that I'm proposing that I'm going to do this scope of cleaning, and you, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, are going to pay me X dollars a week or X dollars a month, and how those payments and when they're due from invoice and those types of things. So you've got to make sure that you really, every business relationship that you are participating in, whether it's with your own partner or whether it's with the outside world, customers, vendors, both of them, there should be something in writing. If there is bound to be some lack of clarity, some miscommunication, some disagreement, as minor as it may be, or a larger disagreement. And the best position to be in when you have any kind of lack of clarity, miscommunication, or disagreement is to have something in writing, have a contract, have a proposal that gets signed that becomes a contract, have a purchase order that has some terms and conditions. Sometimes you can find at least decent documents online. Otherwise, especially if it's a document that you're going to use over and over and over again with customers, make sure you consult with your lawyer. Make sure that your lawyer has taken a look at it, because it's almost guaranteed that the lawyer is going to say, well, what about this? What if, how are you going to handle this? And they're thinking about things that you may not be thinking about, and it's going to be done for your protection. So make sure that you are putting your terms and conditions in writing. Make sure that when you're getting contracts from vendors, from customers, that you're reviewing it. As that slide says, know what you're signing. Make sure you have an understanding of what it is, because here's the thing about the law. Whether you read it or not, once you sign it, you're bound by it. The law presumes that you have read what you're signing. And actually, the term under the law, that when you sign a contract, the law deems you to have negotiated that contract. So if the law is saying that you've negotiated the contract that you've signed, you might as well actually negotiate it. You might as well actually read it and tell your customer, your vendor, I'm not comfortable with this, or what if we do this instead of this, and have a discussion with them. 95% of people who have written contracts, forms that they use with their vendors, with their customers, are willing to move, to budge a little bit on their terms. Some aren't, by the way. And that's okay too. You can make that determination to do business with someone who says, sorry, this is our form, we don't budge on these terms. Okay, if that's true, then you've got a decision to make. Do I want to use this vendor or not? But at least challenge yourself to know these things. And I know you're running a business. The last thing you want to do is to bury yourself in a contract review. I'm a lawyer. I work in contracts, and I don't like dealing with the contracts that are presented to me. I have so much to do that when the asphalt vendor gave us their proposal with their terms and conditions, the first thought I had in my head was, oh my God, I don't have time for this. But you got to do it. You got to look at it. You got to understand what position you're putting yourself in if you are going to go ahead and sign a contract. We'll go through a couple of intellectual property issues. You might be thinking to yourself, I don't have any business dealing with intellectual property. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not an intellectual property lawyer per se, but as a small business lawyer, we have to advise our clients on a number of IP related things. Here's a summary of the things that we're going to talk about right now. Again, just touch on some of these things for your benefit going forward as you build and grow your business. One is non-disclosure issues, non-disclosure agreements. There are times where you're going to share information with someone. You know, fast forward to the day where you're thinking about selling your business to someone else. You might, or you're going to bring a partner on, and you're going to share, you're going to sell a piece of your business to someone who wants to buy into your business. There's lots of other reasons when you're going to be sharing financial information. You want to protect that financial information. You want to cause that potential buyer, that potential partner, whoever it is, that they're not going to use or disclose to the outside world the information that you're going to share with them. You want to protect that information. There's also non-compete agreements and non-solicitation agreements. You probably heard at some point that non-competes were going to be made illegal by President Biden. That ship has sailed. That is a state law issue that the federal government cannot make requirements on. I think the federal government knew that at the time, and the federal government was trying to disrupt non-competes. But the reality is that state laws, state governments have the authority to decide whether or not non-competes are allowed, and if they are, what types of restrictions you're allowed to have with non-competes. California, non-competes are illegal. You can't have non-competes. It's actually a crime to try to impose non-competes on employees in California. Other states offer businesses much more flexibility. Ohio is pretty friendly to business owners when you are having non-competes. So you may bring on a supervisor who you're placing a great deal of trust in them to run a piece of your business. You might consider having that person sign a non-compete, not to prevent them from doing business after they leave your employment, but you don't want them competing directly with you if you can get that. And you don't want them basically taking confidential information and using it to your competitor's advantage or to their advantage if they're going to start a business to compete with you. And non-competes in Ohio are generally enforceable. Again, there are restrictions about how long someone can be prevented from not competing, or in the geographical area, you can't tell someone you can't compete with me anywhere in the United States. That's illegal. You can't tell somebody that you can't compete with me for the next 10 years if you leave my company. That's illegal. But there are reasonable restrictions that are permitted. Non-solicitation is different type of an agreement that's viewed as something that is less onerous, less restrictive than a non-compete. Non-solicitation means, if the agreement provides for this, that you can't solicit my customers. So you're going to work with me, we're going to be partners, or I'm just going to hire you, but I'm going to have you sign this document that says if you ever leave, or even while you're here, you can't solicit our customers for your own benefit or the benefit for another company. You can't solicit our other employees. You can't take our employees away with you when you start your business, or if you're starting a business on the side, or if you leave and go work for somebody else. Non-solicitation, in my mind, is a lesser restrictive and more reasonable type of restrictive covenant that you can have in contracts. You're still letting someone go and sell those supplies. If you're ABC Supply, you're still letting someone go out and do the similar type of business, but they can't take your customers and they can't take your employees. You might have them sign a non-disclosure agreement. They can't take my confidential information, my data, my business plans and things like that. So there's different ways to go about those types of things. Patent law. I personally don't know a heck of a whole lot about patents, but if you're creating something that is so unique and so special that you can get a patent and you want to protect that invention, doesn't have to be a thing like an electronic device. It can be a process. It can be a certain way that we create a product or go through with providing a separate type of service. If you think that your idea is unique enough, it might be an idea to consult with a patent attorney to see if you have a patentable product, a patentable service, a patentable process. There are costs and a lot of time that go into patenting something, but those are generally the types of things that can be patented. There are other things that also allow you to get protection. One is copyright. That's generally applies to what we call works of authorship, things that are in writing, songs, jingles, maybe artistic works. Like it could be like a logo. You can both copyright and trademark a logo, by the way, but the actual unique thing that you are creating from a written or musical or artistic standpoint, those are copyrightable. Copywriting something is very easy. It's cheap, and it's something that is a pretty good idea. You can also, by the way, when you're say that you come up with a very creative flyer that goes along with your proposals about how you do things, and you may write that very creatively. You may decide to copyright that. Well, you naturally have a copyright on it under the law because you created it, especially if you put the C with the circle around it and then the year in your name. That gives you some copyright protection, some copyright rights right there, but it's always good to file that copyright, to register that copyright, and there you can go online and you can copyright something through the federal government's website if you feel like you've got something that you want to protect. Something that's probably more common than copywriting, that is also an easier, simpler form of intellectual property, are trademarks. You typically trademark a name of a company or a phrase or a slogan, which kind of sounds a little bit like copywriting. But the classic thing is either the name of the company or a specific logo, and you see that either TM or R with a circle around it. Those are trademark symbols. You can trademark something with the USPTO, the United States Patent and Trademark Office, in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, it takes forever to get a federal trademark. It usually takes somewhere around 8 months for the federal government to officially provide you with federal trademark protection. You can get a trademark through the state of Ohio. So if you have your business name or a logo and you want to get trademark protection in the state, and you think you're going to have very little involvement in other states, interstate commerce, you're just going to be in the state of Ohio for your business, you may not care about federal trademark protection. You may only want state trademark protection, but you do want to protect your name. You don't want somebody, whether it's in a related industry or a completely different industry, using the name of your business. Under the state of Ohio, when you register the name of your company under the Secretary of State's website, you have to do a name search. And if you do a name search and you find something that is the same as yours, the state of Ohio won't let you pick that LLC. But there are people who will pick an LLC like ABC Company LLC that's completely non-descriptive. And then you want to go ahead and use a DBA for that LLC and use a name that you really like, even though someone's already using that name. If you do that and that other person has trademark protection of that name, you could be violating their trademark rights, and that could subject you to liability. Social media and internet domain names, those are very similar ideas. You've probably heard of people that create websites that they just get the website so people have to buy that website later. They decide that, oh, I can't believe that www.awesomeburgers.com is available, and you would think, well, someone's going to want this. Some burger joint is going to want this. So I'm going to pay the $100 to buy that domain name, and then when somebody wants to use it, maybe they're going to buy it from me. There's people that do that kind of thing. It's not really a trademark issue, but it's just something to kind of think about, that you want to make sure that when you pick your name, you not only are picking something that is not already in use, that no one has rights to, and then once you get that name, you really want to claim it. And trademarking is generally the way to go about that. There's also licensing things that you can license software, you can license forms, documents that are used by someone else. There are companies out there that basically sell the use of a tangible thing or a process or whatever it is. A lot of times that's done through franchise situations, but not necessarily always through franchises. It could be your own independent process. And as you're thinking about how to run your business, you may see something that online or that another business owner uses, and you may be able to actually license that process because they own it. And you want to find a way to try to make your business more efficient, and you use a licensing process. And that usually requires you to enter into an agreement and some type of payment. It could be just monthly periodic payments. It could be a royalty where you're paying someone based off of a percentage of sales. Usually it's a small percentage when it comes to licensing. That's essentially a lot of times what happens with franchises is if you're going to franchise a business and become a franchisee, you have to pay a royalty to the franchisor, to the mothership, as I sometimes call them. So there are types of licenses that are out there also to license certain documents, to license certain processes that are otherwise owned by somebody. For example, you could have a patent on a process, and someone may want to use that process. Then you can enter an agreement for that where you license out use of that process, and you collect a fee for that. And that's, sometimes when you're creative or you have creative people in your corner, thinking about ways to process things out not only makes your business more efficient, but you can also sell it and make money off of it. Okay, so that's all I have from a slideshow perspective. As I said, there's a whole lot of information in those 15 slides. Not a ton of detail, but hopefully I gave you at least a little bit of a tidbit of information that you guys could consider. I'll go ahead and stop sharing and invite anybody for questions. As I said, those slides will be made available for everyone, all the attendees, to have as a resource, and my contact information is there anybody would wants to reach out outside of this presentation.
Bill, thanks for a great presentation. We only have one question so far, and that is a husband and wife want to start a business together. What legal issues would they face?
So, if they are a husband and wife, it matters if they're actually a husband and wife, meaning they've actually been married and there's a marriage license. The state of Ohio or other state recognizes them being a husband and wife. Doesn't necessarily tie to domestic partners, whatever that means. Boyfriend and girlfriend of 20 years or whatever. So, if it is they are married, then the wife is going to have, if the husband dies and there's nothing else in writing, the wife in that circumstance can become the owner or the part owner in that business. So in Ohio, marital rights usually mean that unless there's something else in writing and some other agreement, that whatever one spouse owned, the other spouse inherits. So if you're partnered with another female and she dies, her husband can become your partner. May not be a great situation. So that's something to kind of make sure that you understand going forward. But as long as your partner, your business partner is alive, generally the spouse has no rights in that business. They may insert themselves into the management of the company. They may make things a little bit more difficult and kind of push their weight around a little bit. And sometimes that interferes with your relationship with your business partner. But legally speaking, the husband does not have any rights, even though the husband is poking their nose in and making their opinions known during the course of that business relationship.
Okay, we have another question here, and I'm going to infer something from the question, and hopefully, if not, if the person who wrote it would get back in the chat and clarify. Does an LLC need to only be used under the service they are listed under? I'm assuming they're asking, can you do other stuff with the LLC besides what you filed for?
Generally speaking, no. You can, if you're gonna, even if you create, so when you create the LLC, you fill out the form to create the LLC with the Secretary of State's website, and there's generally a line in there about the purpose of the LLC. And most people have something general like purposes to legally conduct business in the state of Ohio. They leave it very broadly. But if you were to say, we're going to form this business to sell plumbing supplies to people, and then you end up selling electrical supplies, that in and of itself, the purpose of the LLC really is not going to stop you from selling electrical supplies. There might be a business license that you have to obtain in order to sell electrical supplies. There may be some other insurance requirements for you to be able to do that intelligently, but simply expanding your horizons outside of your original purpose or your original, quadrant of business, that's not illegal.
Okay, another question is, if I register with the Ohio Secretary of State, do I also have to register with the county where I'm doing business?
No, generally not. There are exceptions to local registering licensing requirements. I'm most familiar with the construction world. That's really what we do a lot of. And in construction, you need to be registered generally in local municipalities, towns, villages, cities, in order to do certain types of contracting work. And that's generally different depending on the city and locality that you're in. But county registration, unless you're in a rural county, and I mean a rural county where the county is controlling those types of things, typically counties aren't worried about how businesses are registered, typically. You're going to be most interested in townships, in villages, those types, whether they have business requirements, licensing requirements. There may be a licensing requirement specific to that.
Okay. Let's see. I've got a bunch of questions coming. I'm going to try and get to them. Well, what is the difference in liability between an LLC and an LLP?
Okay, so an LLC and an LLP, so a limited liability company versus a limited liability partnership. Both of them generally protect personal liability against the owner. So if it's just a partnership, or even a limited partnership, an LP, the partners, the general partner or the partners, can have personal liability if the business gets sued, or if the business conducts an activity and somebody gets hurt and they don't have enough insurance. Well, the partners can, in certain circumstances, be liable for those claims. If it's an LLP, limited liability partnership, or a limited liability company, and those entities are formed correctly, generally speaking, the entity, the LLP and the LLC, that's who's liable in the event of an injury or someone getting sued, and not the owners. Generally, the owners are taken care of. There are exceptions to that, but point is, there's more personal liability protection with LLPs and LLCs. And the answer to the question is there's very little difference between those entities as far as protection goes. There's taxation differences between LLPs and LLCs, and generally you want to involve a CPA, a accountant of some kind, to make sure you're picking the right entity for tax purposes.
Okay, here's the next question. I'm just taking these in order.
Yeah.
Is a vendor's license or transient vendor's license required for an e-commerce business?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that my advice would be it's going to definitely depend on the type of business that it is. If generally my advice would be that if the business that you're participating in is requires a license, if you had a storefront, an actual physical location, then there's a really good chance that your e-commerce business is going to require a similar vendor's license. But I without knowing more, it'd be hard for me to answer that one a little bit more in detail.
Okay, there are a couple of questions here on funding for businesses. Those aren't related to the topic of the webinar, so unfortunately, I'm going to have to skip over them. Here, but this is a new legal question here. My wife and I are conducting a home daycare business. I take care of the business aspects of the daycare. My wife is taking care of the daycare responsibility operations. How do we define the business?
I'm not sure how do we define the business there. If you and your wife in that circumstance are partners, and you each own the business, if it's 50-50 ownership, then there should be something in writing in the form of either an operating agreement or a partnership agreement or one of those documents to lay out who's responsible for what and who owns what, who makes decisions under what circumstances. But as far as the entity itself is, you've got to make sure that you go onto the Secretary of State's website and form that entity. Make sure that you have a separate name, a name that's not being used, because as you probably know, there's a bunch of different daycare facilities and childcare facilities with different names out there. I'm not sure if I answered that question appropriately, but defining the business there are also licensing requirements too, because you're taking care of children. So that's probably already understood.
Okay, well, here's something on business names just popped up since you just were mentioning that. I found out that someone has my business name with the exception of one letter difference. I am in the early phases, but is it an LLC? What are my options? It is an LLC. What are my options?
Yeah. So I guess the first question would be is who got the name, the preferred name first. Sometimes the state of Ohio lets similar names slip through. Sometimes they're very particular on what's required. But if you are the second person, the second business who happened to pick the similar name, but the the spelling is a little off. Best option maybe, as long as if you are in the early phases of the LLC, is to pick another name. You can change the name of the LLC with the Secretary of State's website. You can also keep the same name of the LLC, but you can do what's called get a trade name or a fictitious name being like a DBA, and you pick a different name of the actual business that people look at, but the name of the LLC is the same. At that point, you might as well just pick another name of an LLC if you're the second one. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to get in a situation where you're fighting over the name with somebody. That's just not worth it. That's the amount of time and heartache and stress that goes into something like that. So I'd probably get out ahead of that one now, or you can contact that person and who has the similar name and try to get an understanding of what business they're in and what business you're in. If there's two different industries that don't overlap at all, you can have an understanding that, you guys are going to coexist and use similar names and just not infringe upon each other. But even that's a risk, because someone may change their mind later and decide, well, I don't like you using this name and I got it first, so you have to stop using your name. So that's why sometimes it's best just to, this is a great name, but I think we have to pick something else.
Hey, here's a question. I'm forming an LLC. What insurance should I get which would conform to my functioning as an LLC that would protect me?
So I'm going to start off by answering this question by telling you to get a really good business insurance agent. That's number one. This is not me punting necessarily, although I kind of am, but you need to make sure, this goes for everybody. Everybody who's getting insurance for their business, you have to make sure that that insurance agent understands your business, and as a result of understanding their business, understands what insurance is actually required, whether there's different insurances required, because business insurance is complicated. There's all kinds of endorsements and additional coverages and things that are required for certain businesses. And you want to make sure that you are not just got an insurance agent who is selling you insurance, because there's a lot of those guys and gals out there. You want to find somebody who really gets it and really understands the insurance that they sell and can really be an advisor to you. Generally speaking, you have to get what's called commercial general liability insurance or liability insurance for businesses. You may need property insurance depending on if you have property. You may have what's called business owners insurance, which is kind of like a comprehensive type of insurance. There's a lot of different options. Those are a couple of buzzwords for insurance that you might be thinking about that you may need. There's also like professional liability or errors and omissions insurance. So to answer the question directly is difficult without knowing more about what type of insurance or what type of business you have. The point is to understand is there's almost definitely more than one type of insurance that you need. And to help you navigate that, you've got to get a really good insurance agent. And I say that because there's a good chance that sometime between now and the end of your business, you're going to have an insurance issue, an insurance claim. And if you don't have the right insurance, you're in trouble. You'll have significant liabilities to your business and maybe even to yourself personally if the insurance that you buy isn't sufficient, doesn't cover enough issues, doesn't have the right boxes checked for that insurance. So you got to make sure that you got a good insurance agent who can really ask the right questions and then put you in the best position to be covered from the risks that can be covered in insurance.
Hey, thank you very much, Phil. We're now at the top of the hour. We're going to wrap up the webinar. I just want to thank Phil for a great presentation and for giving his time as a volunteer through SCORE to provide this information. Everyone who registered for the event and attended will receive a copy of the slides and a link to the recording. Give us a few days to get that out because it takes a while to process it, the recording, and to get the slides sent out electronically, but you will receive it. Thanks again, everybody. I'm now going to end the webinar. Everybody